It's the biggest news in college football this week. Utah leaving the Big 12 for the ACC before they even get in the conference. What? This is Locked On Big 12, Locked On Utes crossover.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Happy Wednesday, everybody. Welcome to Locked On Big 12, Locked On Utes crossover. I'm Drake Toll from America's number one Big 12 podcast, Locked On Big 12. Thank you for making this show your first listen every single day, along with JT Wistricll, making Locked On Utes your first listen every single day for those out in Utah. Today, we will cover how Utah is going to jump ship from the Big 12 already. Also, in the middle segment, the ACC could sweep up Washington State and Oregon State along with the Utes. That's what they want, at least. And Cam Rising's the best quarterback in the Big 12. We'll start with the Atlantic Coast Conference and Utah. Dick Weiss says that Utah is in talks to join the ACC. Now, a reputable reporter, if you ask Dick Weiss, who I don't think I'd ever heard of, and I read the tweet and I think, oh, that is... wow. And we have talked about the rhetoric in Utah, how Utah fans weren't exactly elated on the whole with the Big 12 move. And I know there are some fans that would have wanted the ACC a year ago. Is there, JT, any substance to this, or is it complete BS?
I think it's absolute crap. And if it came to fruition, you can clip this and throw me in one of those videos. I do not care. I think there's just no way. I mean, Utah actually even put out a statement through Brett McMurphy of Action Network, where Utah Athletics, and they put one out.
America's reporter, Brett McMurphy.
America's College Football Insider. Great note there, Drake. I'm glad we got that covered ahead of time there. But in the statement, it said, this is Utah, what they said through. We are proud to be entering into membership in the Big 12 Conference in the coming months and excited to join our new colleagues and member institutions. A report over the weekend that suggested otherwise is completely fabricated and irresponsible. Fabricated and irresponsible are big accusations coming out of there like that. And it just doesn't make any sense. And Drake, you've done a great job covering all the conference realignment latest. The ACC is in danger of losing its biggest brands. Say what you want about the Big 12 and all these different things, and I'm happy to be a part of the Big 12 after everything shook out and everything. There is, at this moment, no one actively looking to leave the Big 12. That already happened with Texas and Oklahoma exiting. So now Utah landed in a stable conference, something we were not in the Pac-12. Why in the world would you leave a stable conference that is setting you up for college football playoff success to go to the ACC, where not only is Clemson and Florida State actively trying to get out, how much longer till North Carolina tries to do the same thing? And if North Carolina leaves, do we really think Miami's going to stay as well? All those big brands that absent in the ACC just feels like that league would be in an even worse off situation. So I just can't imagine why Utah, who just got in a great situation in the Big 12, would look to put themselves in a less stable one by jumping ship and going over to the ACC.
I see the, Dick Weiss credentials that he gives himself, at least National Sports Writers Hall of Fame, award-winning columnist for the New York Daily News. I mean, the guy's got cred. So when you hear a guy like that say that Utah is possibly in talks to the ACC, everybody begins to question the credibility, but at least turn an eye toward that rhetoric. My question would be, if Utah, and it sounds like Utah's administration is very clear, that is not going to happen. The school is going to stay in the Big 12, and as they should. From your standpoint, and you representing Utah fans, JT, if given the option today, May 29th, would you rather be a Big 12 school or an ACC school?
I'd absolutely rather be a Big 12 school. I think the Big 12 is in a much stronger position for the future of college football, and they have the ESPN and the Fox Sports deal. I think there was reports in there that Dick talked about how, maybe the ESPN deal made a little bit more money, but number one, you have ESPN and Fox with the Big 12, and number two, and way more importantly, what we already talked about, the strongest members are trying to leave the ACC. When those members exit, doesn't that mean that the TV contract might also want to try to do some different things? Because, look, I'm just thinking out loud. Like, I know if I made a deal with someone and the most attractive part of the deal, Clemson, Florida State, North Carolina, potentially Miami, exited that deal, I would want to tweak things up too. So I absolutely think the Big 12 is in a stronger position for the future of college football. I think Brett Yormark has done a really good job. I think there are lots of fun and exciting brands on the rise in this conference, Utah being one of them, Colorado with with what Coach Prime is doing. Arizona took a little bit of a hit, but not long till they could be back up. And those are even just some of the Pac-12 schools coming over, right? Feels like only a matter of time until Texas Tech is back up. I know Baylor's not where they want to be right now, but that's a strong tradition and brand. Kansas and Kansas State both going to be vying for conference championships. And Oklahoma State, similar to Utah, is a model of consistency in college football. The ACC can be all over the place, and with some of those brands in danger of leaving, that's the whole thing about conference realignment, is you don't want to get left behind. Why would you go to the ACC and risk being left behind if that conference were to crumble? I don't see this. And I'll also say this about the report that came from Dick Wise. His @ X is literally Hoops Wise. Like, that is, you look at his timeline, it's not filled with college. We're not talking about Ross Dellinger in terms of a history of breaking college football news. We are talking about someone who is predominantly covers basketball, at least from everything I've seen here. He's literally talking about NBA draft stuff. And then you just randomly scroll and find his oh, don't be surprised if this happens with Utah. I think Dick seems like a good reporter from everything I've read. To me, this just seems like a bad source.
JT, loyalty. Is Utah loyal to the Big 12 today 100%? Is that day coming? What's the meter there from the administration standpoint?
I mean, I think Utah's loyal to the Big 12. If something happened where the Big 10 and the SEC were something of a college super conference, I think there's always a room for that, because those are the conferences. They literally just paid out, like, what was it, $1.6 billion in revenue to each of their members. Like, that's a lot of money. Like, there's a reason that the Big 12 would have loved to have Washington, Oregon. Who wouldn't have loved to have those schools, right? There's a reason they chose to go to the Big 12. That's just a matter of the situation. But I do think Utah is loyal to the Big 12 in terms of it's better than the ACC. I think loyalty is, kind of an interesting state in college football right now, because it feels like each school is trying to do what's best for them. We saw when the Pac-12 crumbled, right? It wasn't like, let's stay together for tradition. It became, what's the best deal and offer? And I think in a lot of ways, that's what college football is becoming. I think the Big 12 partners should all look at each other like we have a chance to stay relevant and make each other better. And I think that's why this conference is going to stick together for the next few seasons. And then with the way super conferences always gets tossed around, I guess we'll see after that. I've always been a fan of just a traditional way, so I don't want to see a super conference. But I do think Utah is loyal to the Big 12 right now, especially as we've talked about it for a few minutes here now. I just don't get why you would go to the ACC amidst all the instability. There are literally members suing the conference. Why would you want to go in and be a part of that?
You don't. It's about to fall apart. We talk about that next. Can they save it with Washington State and Oregon State on Locked On Big 12, Locked On Utes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Look, FanDuel is where I go because the first of the month is coming up, and I say, hey, FanDuel, I don't watch hockey, but I do like the Dallas Stars. I lived in the Dallas market for 5 years, so can I bet on the Dallas Stars? And FanDuel says, absolutely. And right now, new customers who want to bet on the Dallas Stars get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/locked on to make every playoff shot count and receive your $150 in bonus bets for any winning $5 bet. The Stars are plus 110 against the Edmonton Oilers. I don't even know where Edmonton is. I'm going to go with the Stars, who lead the series 2-1. That game is today. If you want to bet on it, bet the Stars at FanDuel.com/locked on. Again, that's FanDuel.com/locked on. JT Wistricll of Locked On Utes. The conversation about Utah going to the ACC is likely moot. There's almost no way, but now we've seen it surface that the ACC could try to extend to 20 teams with the idea that Clemson and Florida State are going to leave, and in that, two of our old buddies, Washington State and Oregon State, who many speculated would be in the Big 12, and I still think will bring some sort of brand power into whatever conference they eventually are added to, at least from a viewership standpoint. Washington State, spectacular. The fan base at Oregon State, the passion you get there, and even recent football success is good enough to have a couple of selling points. From your perspective, as someone who's shared a conference with them for 10 seasons, are those two teams a couple of entities that can keep a very much dying ACC alive?
Oh, I mean, I think it doesn't hurt if you're going to lose. I mean, you can't replace the brands that they are in danger of losing, Clemson and Florida State.
And we're going to go ahead and full stop on the conversation. Utah's not going to the ACC. There's no way to bring that partner in with the other two, correct?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you there. That's where, and you sent me a map earlier today, Drake, detailing like what a potential super conference could look like for the ACC. And I do feel bad for Oregon State and Washington State still that they were left out, because based on the brand they were putting on the field, that did not deserve to be the case. Ask DJU, who's getting the bag at Florida State now. What is Miami doing? They gave the bag to Cam Ward because those guys had a lot of success at Oregon State and Washington State. Washington State started the season incredibly hot. I mean, they fell off the cliff, but they were still in the top 20. How about Oregon State? They were still incredibly tough this past season. They beat Utah. They nearly beat Washington at home. They've been one of the toughest places to play at home for years. The style and the success they've had on the field merits them being in a Power 4 conference. I wish it was still Power 5, but obviously that's the whole thing we're doing around with this like that.
Of course, you would wish it's still Power 5. You would.
I know. I have no problem saying I am a traditionalist and that I loved having 5 Power 5 conferences. But I think with the way that everything is shook out, Utah's very lucky to be in the Big 12. I think there's a lot of exciting things coming up in the Big 12, especially as we're less than 100 days now, Drake. I'm already licking my chops to some of these matchups and the new rivalries that are going to be formed for the first time. But I do feel bad that Oregon State and Washington State, they don't really get to form new.
If you're a true traditionalist, then Utah's a great Mountain West school. But that's,
hey, there you go.
You call yourself a traditionalist. Okay.
Well played. I will say, though, going back to Oregon State and Washington State, I don't think they can save the ACC brand. I think it's about as good of a Band-Aid as you're going to get, though, if you lose Clemson. Like, it's a crappy Band-Aid. It's barely going to stick on there, and it's not great. But they at least give you some competitive teams that have had a lot of recent success.
And this was, I think, Bill Connolly from ESPN had put out on a radio show that he thinks the Big 12 will go to 34 or 36 teams and be the first one to really expand into a super conference from a team or size standpoint. And I don't know if I see that. If they do, they certainly bring in Washington State and Oregon State. They go to the ACC and pick up different additions from that conference. But JT, from the perspective of somebody at Utah who just got to the Big 12, the question for me becomes, would you want to see a Washington State, Oregon State? Would you want to see a USF or a Tulane or a San Diego State? Or does this we just need to hold the ship here for a second? Like, at what point do we get any consistency? And is consistency what fan bases want?
I would say this. I would love if I was just talking about the respect I have for the brands and how bad I feel for those fan bases being left out. I don't think what they have put out on the field the last few seasons merits them being put out. I would love to find a place for Oregon State and Washington State in the Big 12 because I think they're deserving of it. But that's where I would stop at. It just, you mentioned some of those numbers, Drake. You should have, I mean, you might have been able to see my eyes, those of you listening, like, they got huge. Like, that's just too much to me at that point. Like, could you imagine having 36 schools and it's like, and our conference championship game where we have 2 teams out of 36. Like, that just seems crazy. That's where we're making all these drastic changes to the sport that in some ways it will always be college football, but in some ways becomes less of the sport we first fell in love with. We're seeing that with all the shakeups and the newness here. So to me, that just seems like, wait, I just don't feel the need to add some of the San Diego States and some of those other schools too. I don't want those schools to be left behind, but I don't want to be I don't feel the need to be in a conference of 30 teams right now. If we have to go to super conferences, which I feel like we're heading for, then that's one thing, obviously, but I don't, especially if it's a super conference, I would want it to include the super brands also, not just some of those other ones too. And I like those schools. I'm not trying to disrespect them. I'm just saying, I don't know if they're having a Big 12 with 30 members and all of those not being bigger brands and a lot of the schools already in the Big 12. I don't see that as a good thing. More is not always better.
Yeah, JT, I truly do believe a year from now, Florida State and Clemson will have left the ACC and North Carolina right behind them. And at that point, when true chaos breaks out, Miami, Pitt, Louisville, there are plenty of schools, NC State, who are looking for new spots to go. You call yourself a college football traditionalist, which I think it's an admirable thing, but if the death of the ACC and the expansion of 4 new teams in the Big 12 in that conference keeps us alive, Utah included, is that something that you fall on the sword for?
Yes, because like you said, then it becomes a survival thing. I mean, that's what it becomes at that point, is you're just trying to keep yourself in the best position to continue to move forward in the college football landscape. I mean, once again, being left behind is the most terrifying thought, right? You have a great season and you're not a part of the super conference or whatever it is. So then you won't get a chance to play for a conference championship. Like, especially being with Utah, like having just won those 2 conference championships. Like that's what we root for these teams for. And yes, obviously a successful season isn't just defined by did you win a conference championship. A lot of brands, you have great individual games and performances and the memories you can make at those games. That's what we're college football fans, right? But the opportunity to compete against the biggest and best is what we all love. I know it didn't go great for TCU, but TCU was a really fun story that they got to the national championship game, that they beat a brand like Michigan. Yes, and they got ran over by Georgia, but they made a fun run there, and that was really fun and exciting. And now you can look at TCU, and every fan base probably does it, where it could be like, if we just get the right mix of talent, games break our way, that can be us. And the thought of that not being available to Utah or a lot of these schools is something that really terrifies me.
JT, coming up, Cam Rising is the best quarterback in the Big 12. Let's talk about it. This is the Locked On Utes, Locked On Big 12 crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by eBay Motors. eBay Motors keeps your ride or die alive every time. I have a Nissan Maxima sitting outside from 2016. 2016 is getting further and further away, by the way, and passion, drive, and patience from eBay Motors keeps my ride or die alive because I like to bump into things. I have a plastic piece that's dragging on the floor. Every time I drive, it just, people can hear it. So I cut it off with scissors. Is that the safest thing to do? I don't know. I got stuff all over my hands. And then I said, eBay Motors, what was this plastic piece? And can you give me another one? And they said, absolutely. With a guaranteed fit, it fit the first time. 122 million parts for your number one ride or die with that guaranteed fit. eBay Motors makes sure you're burning rubber, not cash. Make your car the MVP at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay guaranteed fit only available to U.S. customers. eBay Motors. They will keep your ride or die alive. They will make sure that your 2016 Nissan Maxima, the plastic piece that fell off, is still driving and not making noise. Nobody stares at you on the street. That is ebaymotors.com. Millions of parts for your MVP. Win every time with parts that fit your ride. JT Wistricll of Locked On Utes, Athlon Sports, says that Cam Rising is the number 4 quarterback in the Big 12. Now, granted, it is a loaded quarterback class with guys on kind of that middle section, like an Avery Johnson, KJ Jefferson, Garrett Green, where you go, yeah, those guys are all good or have been good or could be good. And that upper tier features a Jalen Daniels, Noah Fafita, Shedeur Sanders, and certainly Cam Rising. If I say Cam Rising is the number 1 quarterback in the Big 12, can you defend it? Can you build a case for that?
I think you absolutely can, even though I wouldn't necessarily have Cam there. There's no argument that Cam has not performed in the biggest moments on the highest stage because he's been to conference championship games. None of those other guys have. Cam Rising has come through in those moments. Cam Rising has led this Utah team to back-to-back Pac-12 championships. Didn't get an opportunity last year because he was hurt. But I know Cam Rising's never going to be on SportsCenter top 10, right? Very rarely. Like maybe his game-winning run against USC, I'm sure that was. But like the jaw-dropping throw is not going to be there. But the game-winning plays, the clutch throws, that's what Cam has consistently made. And I feel very confident in part that Utah's going to win the Big 12 because they have a guy like Cam Rising, who I trust to not turn it over, who I trust to make the right decisions, to be tough in those spots too. For me, I'd have Shedeur Sanders and Fafita above Cam just slightly. I think their overall talent, Daniels and Cam are interesting because they're both coming off injuries. I would give the slight nod to Cam there, but I think Fafita and Sanders just have more arm talent, can do a lot of things. They put the teams on their back a lot, so I would give them a slight edge like that. But man, I mean, Cam Rising, there's a reason to call him Bad Moon Rising. Like the way he's come through for this team, the clutch plays, the moments, the consistency. We're talking about a guy who, assuming he finishes the season healthy, knock on wood, I mean, he's going to shatter a lot of Utah records. And for some people are like, oh, he's been in college forever. I mean, sure, but he's really only started 2 seasons. So this will be his 3rd. So a lot of those records are still going to be incredibly impressive when you look at the amount of number of games he's played in. So I think it's absolutely fair to argue that for Cam. And as I mentioned, personally, I would have him at 3, but I think even as long as he's in the top 5, I won't fall out of my chair.
There is a very deep quarterback class in the Big 12 this season. I know I mentioned some of the names earlier, and even on the back end, where you find DeQuan Finn, who was the MAC Player of the Year, who's in the offense at Baylor. Baron Morton has experience at Texas Tech, and Alan Bowman, we haven't mentioned, is a Big 12 championship attendee at quarterback at Oklahoma State, who's in a really good spot. And Jaden Rashada, who's also right. Yeah. You go all the way down the list and still find some names that people know in college football. As for Cam Rising, I've seen Utah fans, the rhetoric from fans that he could be the number 1 quarterback in the Big 12. What is the case? If they have a case that he's better than Shedeur Sanders. I know you mentioned Shedeur specifically. He seems to be the consensus number 1, cover of the EA Sports NCAA 25. is it objective that he's better than Cam Rising?
I would put Shedeur ahead. Like I said, just some of the, I think Shedeur has a good chance to be the top overall pick in this year's NFL draft. I think he's that talented overall, all the things he can do. And obviously, you mentioned EA, right? Travis Hunter, all the spectacular things as well. Like we're talking best overall Big 12 player in there too. But going back on Cam, I mean, Cam's just won more than all those guys. So as much as I can get excited about the arm talent of Fafita and Shedeur Sanders, and I don't think those guys have always had, well, Fafita did last year, and the way he came on was really impressive. Shedeur definitely has not had all the pieces available to him. Cam has had good pieces, and in a lot of ways, he's elevated them. Yes, Devon Bailey got drafted by the Denver Broncos, but that was in the 7th round. So it's not like you see, and we know what Dalton Kincaid is like, but Cam helped maximize Dalton and helped him get selected by the Buffalo Bills by helping him ball out at the collegiate level. So I just trust Cam so much. I will say this, as much as I like Shedeur and Fafita, and I feel like they're better overall quarterbacks, man, if you're telling me like I need a 2-minute drive in a big situation, I would be very tempted to pick Cam Rising, which I know in some ways maybe talks back on everything I said, but Cam's been in those big moments and he's done it against the best teams. Fafita did a decent amount, but he's not going to have some of the pieces he did with those guys transferring away. And we also know with Shedeur, we'll still see what that offensive line can do. So I think there's definitely a world where we finish the season, we're like, man, Cam Rising, who had this year to sit back, learn, and absorb a lot of things, read the field differently too. I think if he can shake off that rust, which he got to do a lot in spring ball, I think he could exit it being the best quarterback in the Big 12. I do think that potential exists.
This is not a knock on Cam Rising. It's more a compliment to what Kyle Whittingham has built at Utah. Do you feel like he has the best offense around him in the Big 12 that propels him to be the best quarterback in the conference?
That's a really good question. Because I was actually, Andy Ludwig is the 3rd highest paid offensive coordinator in the country. So this came up recently as well. And I think Andy Ludwig does a very good job. But he is coaching under Kyle Whittingham, who makes sure you run the ball every instance. I think Cam is in a good system to be successful. Is it the best? I think, well, I mean, I will say with Colorado, they had to change offensive coordinators, right? Arizona, they had to change head coaches too there. So that's where I think because of the connection that Cam has with Andy Ludwig, the addition of a Dorian Singer, Brant Keithy coming back.
Keithy huge.
I think Cam actually might be. At first, when you said, I was like, I don't know about that. But then when I look through the other contenders, it's like, well, I know with Cam and Andy Ludwig, they've won before at the biggest level, and I can't say
Kansas State. Colin Klein's gone. I mean, you're looking at some of the bigger, more explosive offenses losing their coordinators. Kansas, everybody's replacing.
Yeah, everyone talks about like, oh, how could Andy Ludwig be in the top 5 offensive coordinators? Because most of the best offensive coordinators become head coaches. That is how. That's where Utah's lucky they got Andy Ludwig. Ryan Day, although it's still weird to think Chip Kelly's his offensive coordinator now, right? But like the Garrett Riley, Lincoln Riley, all these guys, like most head coaches, actually, well, Garrett's the OC at Clemson, but even they had a down year last year. So that's where I think Cam's in a very strong position to succeed. And I might even say the very best of all the guys around him because of the coaching and some of the weapons they have that are proven at the collegiate level.
Look, Utah's good. There's the idea that a Locked On Big 12 seen a lot of JT Wistricll, and I think it's like once every 2 or 3 weeks at this point, and that is what you get when you have a full-time contender, and that's what Utah is. They are a full-time contender next year in the Big 12 conference. They're the dark horses like Texas Tech or West Virginia. You think, hey, they could be really good. They could be really sneaky. There are enough guys back, but Utah has the formula, the pieces, and Cam Rising's at the very top of that to win the Big 12 conference, and I'm not shocked they're the favorite right there with a Kansas State, with a Kansas, and people are still really high on Arizona. JT, before we get you out of here, where can folks find more of your content, more of your show, and what all you covering this week?
Yeah, you guys can head over and check out everything Locked On Utes. Just search it up on YouTube. Follow us on X at Locked On Utes. My own personal handle is at JT Wistricll. So tweeting out some random things at times, but mostly Utah football related. So hope you guys check me out there. Drake, always great joining you, and always enjoy these crossovers because like you said, Utah is going to be in the top. You can hate us because you ain't us, but this year they deserve to be in that conversation, Big 12 fans.
Let's do a little Locked On Cougars with BYU coverage over the course of the rest of the week, maybe to offset that comment. Coming up the rest of the week on Locked On Big 12, more on the ACC's implosion and how they're not going to get Utah, and that is completely delusional. Thanks to our friend Dick. And for everybody else out there, thanks for making these 2 shows your first listen every single day, covering all Big 12 and Utah Utes as much as we can. This has been and always will be Locked On Utes, and Dose Grande.